In terms of participation, there's always some kind of criterion within a rubric that they need to fulfil. We also have kind of feedback sessions, and I'll make a point of noting down who's answering the questions, and I'll tell the students that, right, I'm going to write down your name as you're giving some feedback and the kind of the level of detail that you're giving me. So I'll just make some notes as we're having this discussion. In terms of participation from a practical standpoint, there's actually a column in our reports at our school that talks about participation, and you have to be able to, it's just like a 3-level thing. So to get an always, it means you're always actively participating, engaging in what's happening in the classroom. And I straight out tell the students that at the beginning. So from a reporting perspective, that's important. And also at parent-teacher interviews and things like that, which will come later, you want to be able to say, look, there were a few activities that Sheila wasn't feeling comfortable with, or she works really well in groups, but when it comes to solo performance, she does feel a little bit hesitant or reluctant to demonstrate what she's learned. And by having something concrete, like, she participated in X, Y, Z, or in this rubric she only scored a medium, whatever, 2 out of whatever it might be, you can then talk to parents about that and talk to the students themselves. I find that the best way.
And so what about, like, if you've sent them off to make performance work for a performance-based assessment, are you documenting something about how they're engaging in the process?
Absolutely.
And so how do you do that?
I'm writing notes, so I'll have like a little, I'll put them into their groups, or they might have selected their groups depending on the situation. So I have just a form that I fill out that's got their name on, and then just a few different criteria, and I can tick some boxes, because it's also good to be able to say to students that might be kind of taking control and maybe being quite bossy or quite, kind of telling everyone what to do, taking that maybe directorial role a bit too far. It's be able to say, actually, you're doing this, but did you listen to everybody's input at the beginning? Actually, no, you cut off a few people. So I've got just like a series of boxes that I might tick, and then I'll just write a few notes down the side, basically. But I'm constantly walking around each group, and I'll spend 10 minutes with one group, and I might spend 5 with the next, because I can already see that they're on top of things, they're using their time, they're all ticking the boxes, essentially. So I find that easier, rather than just go, off you go, and then go, looking around, everyone seems to be doing something, so it must be working, right? I find things like that really helpful, and once you've created that sheet once, you can use it again and again and again.
So I will constantly assess them whilst they are rehearsing. I think all teachers do that, and you need to be able to watch what they're doing. As far as VCE goes, that's not a criteria in the study design, but you need to be all over it. You need to know what they're doing and whether they're participating, and that's the type of thing that you can pull them aside, like everybody individually, and have a little meeting, a little interview about how they think they're going and what it is they need to do to get the mark that they want, and what are their jobs and where are they at with their jobs. So in theatre studies, you might be talking to the lighting designer or the stage designer, and you'll be saying, well, where are you up to? What do you need to do next? How long is it going to take? When's it needed by? And that just gets the kids thinking, oh yeah, I'm a bit behind, or oh yeah, I'm really good, I'm on time. So that's good. In 7s, 8s, 9s and 10, I actually do assess them on how well they have gone through the rehearsal process, and that all comes back to me with working in teams. So if they're not rehearsing well, they're not going to be working with their team well. This is assuming they're doing an ensemble performance. If they're not doing an ensemble performance, it's really good. I'm going to know if they wrote their monologue or solo the night before, and that's not good enough if it's a long process. And I will have already given, because I'm very organised, I've already given them a suggested timeline on where they would need to be, and keep prompting them, have you done this yet, because you're running out of time. So I will know where they are, and that is one of the criteria on their rubric that I'll assess them on. Or if I'm not assessing them on a rubric, just taking it into consideration when I give them their mark, and that goes in their feedback. So I actually would say to a student, you actually did a really good performance, your expressive skills are really well developed, however, it was evident that you only wrote this yesterday, and that's not good enough because that's not what the assignment was. So, and really stand firm on your convictions about that. If I don't want any kid in my class who's going to muck around and distract other kids for 10 lessons and come in and just ace it because that's what they're able to do. That's not learning. But with the year 7s and 8s, 9s and 10s, when they work in teams and doing ensemble performances, especially with year 7s who always seem to have group issues and friends issues, you need to stay on top of what's going on, and there shouldn't be any big issues if you can stay there and figure out what's going on. And if you know that, you can assess that. So I don't do anything fancy because I have so little time with the 7s, 8s and 9s, I don't do anything fancy with an assessment, a separate big assessment on how well they worked. But I do get them to reflect on their preparation process. So because what else do they need to do next time in order to better prepare? Everything in the product that they present to you, that they perform, is because of their preparation process. So they need to improve that process or do something better in that process if they want to have a better product. So I always get them to reflect on that, and I'll get other kids to point out something in the product, in the performance. So what is it that we liked? What is it that we didn't understand? And that's a way of saying something they didn't like. So instead of the kids saying, "Oh, I didn't like it when you did this," you can say, "I didn't quite understand why you chose to such and such." And that gets the kids thinking about, "Oh, I didn't really think about that one quite a lot." Well, next time you'll have to, type thing. So I suppose it's really easy to assess them and give them that grade and feedback on the process if you're there at the rehearsal stage as well. Don't know what you're going to do if you're going to leave those lessons as extras. I'm not sure about that.
Assessing the creative process, I really rely heavily on the reflective journals that they do. So as, for example, if you've got a class who's putting a play together, I'll get them to keep a reflective journal themselves throughout the process, but every so often there'll be something, a stage that we've done that I want them to think about. So we may have just worked on a script, and I'll say, okay, for this week's journal, I want you to write about, what was it like trying to put the script together, what challenges did you face, and so on. So at times I'll give them a specific topic that I want them to write about. Other times they're sort of free to write whatever they think is pressing for them at the time. Because a lot of what we do in class is group work, and I really need some way of checking that they're all doing their fair share of that. I do a lot of peer assessment, self and peer assessment, just little questionnaires that they can fill in. Give themselves, even as simple as just giving yourself a ranking 1 to 5. I worked well with my team, I did my fair share of work, I contributed to this, whatever. And by balancing up the peer assessments with their own assessments and my own observations as well, you can generally come up with a fair idea of, well, okay, that kid's basically done nothing, well, that kid's done it all for them, sort of thing. Or, yeah, this group's done a good job of, allocating roles and each sharing the load a bit more evenly.
The kids, year 7, 8 and 9, they have really clearly defined criteria with rubrics, and they get marked individually, although they work in groups. I don't. They do in year 9, they do a self-written, self-devised monologue sometime in first term, but year 7 and 8 work in ensemble groups, so they do very practice-based performances. In year 7 it's Greek theatre or mime in the first semester, and at year 8 it's comedy and then commedia, so they've got a base in some of the historic theatrical styles. They get the criteria, they get a little bit of research information on the different areas, and then they work in their ensemble. Now, the process is always more important than the product, and that's part of the criteria and the rubric. So a lot of your assessment is based on observation, going around and watching the groups. little signs like they start pretending to talk about the performance they're about to do really loudly and confidently as you walk towards the group. That's a dead giveaway they've been talking about lunch. But again, I guess that comes with experience. The groups that constantly turn to see where you are generally not focused, and you observe. One of my favourite ways of observing is not even looking at the kids. I sit in the middle of the room, pretend to be on something, whether I'm writing in my chronicle or on my iPad, and I listen. And it's the process, because some kids will talk to each other, whereas they will not actively discuss things with you in front of the whole class. And then once they've gone through their performance rehearsals and you go around and watch, sometimes again a quiet little sensitive group are much better off with you just peripherally looking at another group but actually watching them, and you will see the dynamics of the group, who is leading it and then may not shine in the actual performance. So you can't mark them on who's the best actor, because really it's the process of creativity that's the most important.
So assessing participation, I think, is really challenging, and the fact that it's challenging for me means that it's really challenging for kids. So I take the approach of trying to operationalise what it is that I'm looking for in participation. So rather than saying I'm going to assess your participation and assume that we have a shared understanding of what that term means, I try and break it down in terms of what are the things that I will be looking for, what are the things that I will see, and I articulate those clearly on the rubric that I use in assessing a kid. But we also talk about how there's different perspectives on participation. So I will see one thing, and these are the things that I might see, but what might your group members see you doing, and what might you see that nobody else is going to see as well? And I tend to break it down too in terms of helpful and not helpful behaviours, so that we can articulate what both are. And I think that part of the way that I assess that is through my observation, through self-assessment and peer assessment, and also through reflective work, so some written reflective work. And especially because I work only with boys, I think the general log, the Dear Diary Today I, doesn't really work with boys. And I think really structuring that type of reflective response is really key for them, and that information is really valuable for me in assessing participation.
So another couple of things that are important about assessing and reporting the process is doing formative assessment. So watching them along the way throughout performance work, from the start of the performance making process, getting them to workshop things, participate in workshops, watch the workshops, get them to brainstorm things together, do things together, get up on the floor and work, watch them work and actually sit and for me to be able to actually sit and watch them work, take notes while they work, and then give them notes. So be able to sit around in a circle with them afterwards and give them notes about the work and ask them for feedback as well on the work, so that they're reflecting on their own work. Talking to them about things that I think they're doing really well, and think great things that are coming out of the work and things that maybe are missing and that need to be developed. So I think assessing their work along the way is also about watching their performance work and how it's developing, and getting them to use different methods of rehearsal. And that can be anything from doing speed running of lines to improvising with characters, to getting them to workshop a scene and expand it, to getting them to do a scene in a particular theatrical style that actually isn't the theatrical style of the play, and seeing what comes of that and what ideas they get, choosing one characteristic of a character and just playing that characteristic and really going for it and seeing what happens to their acting style, and then making them do it again and talking to them about what changed for them and asking them whether they think they're actually getting somewhere with their performance and whether they're building on the skills. So I think watching the rehearsal work and watching the process work and watching their workshopping and running workshops and actually discussing why we're doing certain things and getting their feedback and having me give them notes is really important. So that's one way of marking performance work and process, which is sort of separate to folio because that's about getting up on the floor and talking and watching and playing. Like during monologue time, I spend lots of one-on-one time with students. So apart from our class time, I have tute times with students where I spend a lot of time going through criteria with them when they're performing their monologues or they're doing their monologues, and we work on different criteria at different times, and we actually talk about what direction means and what use of space means, and we go through activities that use the space in different ways, and we go through activities that explain to students what tension really means and what tension and timing is, because they don't necessarily understand what that is naturally, and assessing one criteria at a time sometimes is good too. Getting them to do a moment of their monologue, like just to choose 30 seconds and to say that we're just going to look at acting skills for that 30 seconds, or we're just going to look at whether the context or the implied persons are obvious, or just looking at one criteria sometimes works really well. I don't know if I've said enough.